Hello viewers, today we'll talk about free consent. Friends, before we go to free consent, let us recall what section 10 says. All agreements are contracts if made by the free consent of the parties. Pausing here for a moment. What is free consent? And for that purpose, we will have to first look to what is consent. Section 13 of the Contract Act defines what is consent. I'll first read the section and then we'll proceed. Section 13 says, two or more persons are said to consent when they agree upon the same thing in the same sense. Full stop. So minimum 2 persons is a legal requirement. Understanding the same thing in the same sense. Go back to section 2A and 2B. 2A says, with a view to obtaining the assent to such act or abstinence. And section 2B says, assents thereto. Meaning thereby, whatever is proposed is understood and without variation, unconditionally, unqualified way, when it is accepted, yes, it becomes a promise. And this can happen only when both the parties understand the same thing in the same sense. Friends, mind well here, language has its own importance. You can't use the way you like. Words have definite meaning. And if you give different word to different thing, I do the same thing, will not be able to reach at the consensus. Therefore, the thing to which I term as table, you should also understand it as a table. And if the talk is for the sale of table, there should be consensus ad idem, understanding the same thing in the same sense. It is this consent that is important for the purpose of law of contract. Again, section 10 says about free consent. So the difficulty now starts, what is free consent? And free consent is also defined in the contract. Section 14 says, I'll first read the section and then we'll explain. Consent is said to be free when it is not caused by 1. Coercion, as defined in section 15, or 2. Undue influence as defined in section 16, or 3. Fraud as defined in section 17, or 4. Misrepresentation as defined in section 18, or 5. Mistake, subject to the provisions of sections 20, 21 and 22. Full stop. Consent is said to be so caused when it would not have been given but for the existence of such coercion, undue influence, comma, fraud, comma, misrepresentation, comma, or mistake, full stop. Look at the section. In simple parlance, you can also say that these are all 5 flaws in consent. What section 14 says? Consent is said to be free when it is not caused by any of these forces, that is coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, and mistake. What they are, again, law has separately defined each one and will deal with separately. Suffice it right now to know that these are the 5 flaws which vitiate the consent, in the sense that if the consent is obtained by exercising of any of these 5 flaws, it is not a free consent. And that is what is further said in the last part of the section, saying that consent is said to be so caused when it would not have been given but for the existence of such coercion, etc. Meaning thereby, had there been no coercion, no undue influence, no consent would have been given. This is how law treats consent to be free. Absolutely free mind without any force. And then section 10 says that yes, such free consent is an important element in the contract. Now we'll first look at what is coercion. Section 15 defines coercion, and it says coercion is the committing or threatening to commit, comma, any act forbidden by the Indian Penal Code or the unlawful detaining or threatening to detain, comma, any property to the prejudice of any person, whatever, comma, with the intention of causing any person to enter into agreement. Full stop. And the explanation to the section also runs like this. Explanation: it is immaterial whether the Indian Penal Code is or is not in force in the place where the coercion is employed. Full stop. Friends, coercion is given very wide meaning. Any act forbidden under the Indian Penal Code anywhere against any person, if it is used to obtain the consent, law says it is coercion. And therefore it is not necessary that it should be only within the territory where Indian Penal Code is applicable, coercion must be exercised, or against any person in whom the parties to the contract is interested. No such ifs and buts. The fact that any act forbidden under the Indian Penal Code is either committed or a threat is given to commit the same. Similarly, about property, yes, law treats it as a coercion. And the person whose consent is obtained by exercising such coercion would be entitled, we'll see later on, to avoid the contract. And that is why such contracts are termed as voidable contract, meaning thereby can be avoided by one and not by the other. One who has exercised coercion cannot avoid the contract. Full stop. Next important thing is section 16, which defines undue influence. I'll first read the section and then we'll proceed for explanation. It's a bit lengthy section, so kindly bear with me. We'll go by one subsection, then another section, and then third subsection. Section 16(1) says a contract is said to be induced by undue influence where the relations subsisting between the parties are such that one of the parties is in a position to dominate the will of the other and uses that position to obtain an unfair advantage over the other. Full stop. But now observe the change. Coercion did not be qua parties to the contract. Undue influence categorically says relations subsisting between the parties. So strangers are clearly out of the definition. Out of the two or more parties, one of the parties is in a position, one, to dominate the will of the other, and two, uses that position to obtain an unfair advantage. So for undue influence, these two things are must. That one of the parties is in a dominant position. He can exercise the will of the other party. Meaning thereby you can say that even if that other party wants to say no, will not be able to say no and has to say yes. And second thing is that dominant position is used to obtain unfair advantage. Obviously unfair advantage. Property worth lakhs of rupees is sold for thousands. 1 0 is taken away. No sane man would enter into such contract unless there is exercise of such undue influence. Therefore, for undue influence, what is required is the relations between the parties where one is in a position to dominate the will of the other and that party uses that position to obtain unfair advantage. Now, subsection 2, which says this wise: in particular and without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing principle, a person is deemed to be in a position to dominate the will of another, A, where he holds a real or apparent authority over the other, or where he stands in a fiduciary relation to the other, or B, where he makes a contract with a person whose mental capacity is temporarily or permanently affected by reason of age, illness, or mental or bodily distress. Full stop. Friends, without prejudice to what is stated in subsection 1, keeping intact that principle of relation between the parties, dominant position, and using that position to obtain unfair advantage, this subsection says that when you can say that one party is in a position to dominate the will of the other, and then illustrates the circumstances which are clear from clauses A and B, that when one has real or apparent authority over the other, you can say superior subordinate, or there is fiduciary relationship like doctor-patient, spiritual guru and disciple. The third category is because of illness. One is so far as become mentally so disturbed that is not able to decide clearly, is not able to form a rational judgment, is very likely to be influenced by, say, the caretaker, and then the caretaker takes advantage of it. Law says, because of this situation, it is presumed, because the earlier part says, is deemed to be in a position. In such situation, these are the illustrations, not exhaustive list, that these are the situations where law, by deeming fiction, assumes that one is in a position to dominate the will of the other. There could very well be other situations. Depending on the facts and circumstances, you can say that yes, there is one in a position to dominate the will of the other. Now next, subsection 3 says, again, I'll read first the section, where a person who is in a position to dominate the will of another, comma, enters into a contract with him, comma, and the transaction appears on the face of it or on the evidence adduced to be unconscionable, comma, the burden of proving that such contract was not induced by undue influence shall lie upon the person in a position to dominate the will of the other. Full stop. Having said what is undue influence, having further explained that ordinarily what shall be taken as having position to dominate the will of the other, subsection 3 further says that in such situation, when the agreement is entered into and either on the face of it, the face of the agreement, by looking at it, or after reading the evidence, adducing the evidence, it appears to be unconscionable. As I have told you earlier, property worth rupees lakhs is sold for thousands. In that circumstance, it will be a burden on the person who is in the position to dominate the will of the other to establish that consent is not obtained by undue influence. In fact, this is a protection to the person who is under the undue influence of another. Therefore, subsection 3, when puts burden on the person who is in a position to dominate the will, protects the person whose will is exercised by another. Further, this section in the end says that nothing in this subsection shall affect the provisions of section 111 of the Indian Evidence Act 1872. Friends, the said section also deals with the good faith of the transaction, which substantially matters on such situations. But so far as we are concerned, while dealing with the issue of undue influence, are not very much concerned about it, because this law is self-contained. Now, the remaining part about fraud, misrepresentation and mistake will take in another lecture. Thank you.